Hello, welcome to our welcome to our Tuesday evening workshop. If I can have it quiet in the chambers, that'd be great. We are here with the continuation of our budget discussion. If you two would like to introduce yourselves, and then following that, so we were thinking about things, but over the weekend here. But then, if I can have your take on what would be best.
Okay, certainly, Mr. Mayor. Heather Hunter, City Administrator.
Tracy Roy, Finance Director.
So last week we went through some options that were presented to council, as well as kind of vetting the capital list that was funded, recommended funded through fund balance, as well as whittling down some options for the LCIP, recognizing we're still struggling getting under the 80% limit, the 95% limit, and even if we incorporate that 34 inflationary rate, getting down to that limit. So at this point, we are scheduled to present and adopt the budget. I would defer to Councilor Scott on how the school committee's budget meeting and discussion from last night went, if you would not mind sharing.
Certainly. So last night, the school committee agreed to do a reserve for $1 million from their fund balance, specifically for the special purpose private schools transportation. That's the $800,000 we've been talking about. There's no guarantee that it was going to be the $800,000. That was an estimated number that the superintendent had done, but he did speak to the Department of Education yesterday, and they assured him that put that money aside. Still without a date, but make sure that you're prepared for it. So they said to put it in reserve. Now, if this is my understanding, and I'm still trying to make sure I understand this correctly, by us putting it in reserve, when it comes to the council next week, the school committee voted to put it in reserve, keeping the balance, keeping the mill rate for the school department at $1.34. Then it would come to the city council next Tuesday for our vote, but you also have the city council voting on the reserve, is what the superintendent said. And this way, did not have to go back to a referendum to the community if it was needed to be used.
That is not the way that it's happened in the past.
Okay.
We can clarify that for next week for sure.
Okay.
Typically, the city council votes to appropriate the bottom line number.
Right.
And part of that appropriation recognizes all the mathematics that get to that bottom line number. So the fund balance dedication and or use of that, if the need should arise, would automatically be part of that calculation. Okay. What he is probably thinking of is the wording that they may need for the referendum questions.
Right.
And that's not something the council gets involved. I know they
Okay.
typically have their attorney review their questions from that standpoint. But I will speak with him and clarify that.
Just clarify that.
Yes.
Because part of that conversation was to ensure that the council was reassured that that's where that money would be used for. It couldn't be just used if something else came up or that sort of thing. It was specifically for that. So, and also a little bit of buffer in case there was something else like a little extra that needed in there or something to that effect. So that's why the school committee went with $1 million, because we thought about what's going to happen in '25 and not taking that fund balance that down all the way. So because we've already used $5 million from the 10 that we have, now an additional $1 million for this particular piece, and we don't know what we might get for at the end, but at the end of the year for the audit, that we might get some more in, but we don't know what that number could be. So, and then once it's voted on, you can't change that formula or add to it, because that would have to go back to referendum. Right?
Any change in the bottom line tax rate
Right.
would have to go.
Yeah.
The articles, my understanding, the articles would need to, that portion of that goes back to that referendum question.
Right. And that would have to be part of the articles for the vote.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily, council would approve it from the standpoint they approve those to go to the referendum.
Right. Okay.
But it's, as far as the bottom line amount, that does not impact how that vote goes.
Okay, all right. And we did have a further discussion. We did talk about, if it goes down the $1.34, we're talking about cutting positions, real effect on the schools. And last night, we did receive an accreditation report for the Lewiston High School, and though there were a lot of things that still needed to be worked on, the accreditation will be voted on by the committee, the accreditation committee, which is a committee from several different high schools in the state and also outside of New England that come in and look at different high schools to look at what might be needed. They talk to school committee members, staff members, students, administration, even the janitors, everything. What do you think the school needs? What do we need to focus on? We got our initial report last night, and one of the things that they discussed was the safety of the high school and the need to have the doors further monitored. The number of doors that are in that building, I believe, are 32 doors. Has been situations where students have propped the doors open. There are cameras on the doors, but there's not a notification on the door when it is opened up, because we don't have that set in place on each of the doors. So a student could prop the door open. We've had that happen. Students that are being truant have come in, and it has resulted in a disciplinary hearing. They're traveling around the hallways. It's a safety thing also with everything that we're seeing in our country right now. We want that school secured. And to me, that was a very scary thing when I read that report last night. I would recommend that you all take the time to read that. That came in, that's on the school committee's website. It's a 39-page report, and it really talks about everything from graduation rate to the statistics at the school, the number of students that are in poverty, what the languages are, everything that everybody spoke about the school. We need more student counselors. There's lacking in student counselors for moving students forward that want to go, make college appointments and that sort of thing. We've had difficulty hiring a guidance counselor. There's just a lot of conversation around that. And we'll find out the full accreditation in June, what the commission votes on that. So there was concern that any lowering of the budget is going to seriously impact things that we really need. We did discuss having a facilities meeting to talk about the LCIP, and the facilities committee is meeting on Monday at 4 o'clock. So we'll have that information to discuss those 3 pieces that you had brought up last week and talk about those particular pieces. I will say that over the weekend, and I misunderstood this because I spoke to Administrator Hunter this morning about that. There was a significant conversation going on social media. Some pictures were taken about the playground equipment at Montello School. And so I went down there yesterday to take a walk around and take a look at it, and it's quite horrendous. It's bad. It hasn't been worked on for quite some time. So I, in my head, was under the assumption that the Montello exterior upgrades might be part of that. And we looked at the LCIP this morning, and that is already budgeted for this year for summer work, so that wouldn't be part of that. So I wanted to just let you know that I'll include that in that conversation for our facilities committee to talk about removing those. And I believe that's everything.
Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question, I guess, for Councilor Scott. Did Langley say anything about if the state's funds get larger and they come down, that $800,000 is going to be put back into their fund? Or was it going to just sit in a bank?
It would go back into fund balance if it was never ever used.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It wouldn't just be frivolously used. It's going to be earmarked for that specific thing.
Thank you.
Councilor Jelinas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Scott, I heard you talk about, if we were to go from 170 to 134, that is really looking at staff positions, and yet I thought that to get us down to 134, that was the amount of the emergency
No,
legislation.
if we went below the 134.
Below, okay.
Right.
So am I right in assuming that if we go to the 134, that is really just earmarking that emergency legislation fund, which we would hold for the fiscal year, and then the event that legislation didn't move forward, it would get returned?
Correct.
Thank you.
So council, last Thursday, I presented some options to you, and I know that you wanted a little bit more time studying those options, so I guess I would be happy to address any further questions that may have arisen over the weekend. Just as a review, option one, especially for Councilor McCarthy, option one assumes a 90% confidence level in revenue sharing, providing an additional a little less than $1.6 million or 71 cents on the tax rate. I would request that we would reserve fund balance for that amount in case that doesn't come to fruition. And because we are essentially using fund balance potentially for operations, because those confidence levels are higher than we normally include in a budget, that would take 5 votes. If I don't get 5 votes, I cannot reserve the fund balance for revenue sharing. That's what that 5th vote allows me to do. Additionally, there were about a half a dozen of adjustments that came in. One references one of the parking lot items, an additional fund balance item that we found when we were combing through. That's the cameras that were in the maintenance and licensing budget that are truly cameras that can be reclassed to fund balance. We're changing the healthcare educator program and then adjusting the salary reserves as we're getting closer with contract negotiations to see how those are ending up, as well as an additional amount in a library part-time grant that they get from the state. So at that option number 1 brings us down to $29.90 for a tax rate, or 4.9%. All of these options assume that $1.34 on the school side. So that's already factored into all of these options. Option 2 shrinks the confidence level from state revenue sharing from 90% down to 85%. So at that point, we're talking about a little over $975,000. Again, I would still request a fund balance reservation based upon the 85% confidence level. You have the same half dozen adjustments with the exception under the regular option 2. We are looking at the 45 hours of the library, staffing only on Monday, which was a staff-supported schedule change that allowed them to do work without having to service the public, to give them planning opportunities and so forth. So it gives them that closure date, but staffing is at the same capacity. They're saving that in part-time wages. Option 2 gives us the $30.16 or 5.8% increase. Option 2A assumes that same 85% revenue sharing confidence level. The adjustments I just spoke about totaling $293,139 and adds an additional group of adjustments totaling $353,453. All of those adjustments either freeze positions in the current year or phase in hiring those positions. That includes a mechanic, a highway worker, phasing in 2 highway workers, removing 1 RMN and adding back $30,500 in overtime at the fire department, phasing in the hiring of the fire inspector, the assessor, reducing the salary reserve from a contingency amount, and reducing the advertising budget further in the marketing account. The other biggest noted item there is reducing the library from 45 hours to 40 hours with the elimination of a full-time vacant position. And that gets us down to $30 even on a tax rate, or a 5.3% increase. So that's the review of that. I don't know if there are any other changes, questions, at least from a budgetary standpoint.
Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, option 2 at 85%, that brings the rate down to $30 and what?
Option 2 is $30.16.
It's 16 cents.
And if we take those other phased-in positions, that's when it reduces it to $30 even.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor.
Counselor Scott.
Thank you. Did we need to have any further conversation on water and utilities?
I kind of wanted to get through this, but I remembered my
Okay,
sticky note.
thank you. I just thought of that, okay.
Thank you.
Counselor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I couldn't support using 90% of the general revenue sharing, not with what's on the horizon for the economy in the United States and in Maine in particular. I think it'd be foolish to go that far. Even 85% is stretching it, but if that's the way everyone wants to go, I would support 85, but I won't go a cent over the 85%. Thank you.
Counselor Harriman.
Thank you. I'm still in favor of option one. I think that the 90% confidence level, especially where we would be holding that money in reserve in case it doesn't come through, I think that is definitely financially prudent. It wouldn't cut any more positions or have to phase in any positions, and we'd end up with a lower tax rate than what we were thinking. So I would still definitely support option one.
I agree that 90% is within the realm of reason. Recounting conversation that I had with the state before COVID, the state hit revenue sharing numbers. They were either over or under by only 0.5%, 2%, and then since COVID, they have been extremely conservative, so we've received even more money than from revenue sharing from the state than they originally told us. And we're not quite done with this year, but that's how it's going to look like this year as well. And in fact, in order to be dipping, if I'm understanding this correctly, Administrator Hunter, in order to dip into our reserves, should we vote that way, the state would have to be off by 10% in their number before we even start dipping into that, correct?
That would be correct.
And I just, where the state has been ultra-conservative since COVID and we've received more money, I just don't think it's reasonable to expect that the state is going to be short 10% on the number that they're giving us. Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What was the confidence level last year when we finalized the budget?
I believe it was 78%.
Okay.
77, 78%.
Roughly, how much more than that 78% did we receive?
We are still in that year, so we
Right.
don't know. We are trailing above that at this point, but we can definitely send that detail out to you.
And that money, that overage goes into fund balance, and that fund balance has been used to fund things in this year's budget to reduce this year's budget, correct?
That's correct. Anything, any revenues received above what was appropriated, any expenditures that fall less than what was appropriated, lapse into fund balance unless we designate an encumbrance for those. And then what's allowed to be used against our fund balance policy. And we still have to measure the floor and the ceiling, and we typically hovered right around the 10%.
Okay. So anything we spent, any more of the revenue sharing that we spend in the budget this year, we'll have less to spend on fund balance next year, because it'll already be spent.
We will be appropriating the level, a higher level, so we would not have as much surplus as we potentially would in the past in order to balance the fund balance expenditures in FY '25.
So next year's LCIP will be even tougher than this year.
Not only the LCIP, but the capital that
Right.
falls in the operating budget, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not, the money isn't just floating out there, it's being used appropriately in funding items that, to reduce our borrowing. So it's not like it's a reserve, and it's insurance against the downturn in the economy. And I am supporting 2A. A lot of those positions have been vacant for a while and will be tough to fill anyway. So I think it's prudent to go with 2A with the 85% general.
I would also indicate, a number of years ago, and at this point I'm probably dating myself, so probably close to 20 years ago, the city stopped budgeting a contingency. We used to have a true contingency within our budget. So when you stop budgeting your contingency, that is your cushion, if you will. At that same time, that's when we came close to adopting the fund balance policy. Part of that adoption and that removal of the contingency forces you to be more conservative on a revenue scope of things, because if you're off in revenue and you have any kind of whoopsie on an expenditure side of the house, you have a very quickly a double whammy. And that's the piece that providing conservative revenues allow you to kind of brace for impact, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Pease, and then we'll move to this side of the
Thank you.
table.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm looking at you and Tracy, and I know you guys, you do numbers all the time. I have a lot of confidence in you guys. I don't have a lot of confidence in the state. What you hear from the state doesn't always come true. Yeah, they make mistakes and it gives you more, but I don't want to take that chance. Which do you feel more comfortable with? The 85 or 90%?
You want to go first?
I'd feel comfortable.
Do you mind
staying-
moving the mic closer to you?
I'd feel comfortable staying at where we're budgeted currently. With the state currently, if you read their December report, the forecast committee, it states that they're not, they don't know where we're going to be come next year. So with the uncertainty, I don't like putting in any additional funds from state revenue sharing, but ultimately it is the councilors' decisions.
So you're, so you're talking about at 90%?
No, it's the 77% that
Oh,
we have in the
77%.
current budget.
Thank you.
And you might recall when I first proposed the first round of adjustments, nudging that up the additional $2 million, and I indicated that's about where my comfort level lied. Looking at, when we were getting ready to do these final adjustments and putting things on the parking lot, and the mayor talked about, his outreach with revenue sharing, it allows us to balance the risk by reserving the fund balance. That's about the only option that affords us that luxury of doing that. But again, my concern is I need 5 votes to do that. Because in essence, we are programming a fund balance for operation. The only time we've done that since we approved the fund balance policy is the year that we were in COVID. And we truly, at that point in time, Ed Barrett was there, at that point in time, we went back to actually forecasting revenues during the Great Recession. And that's how slim the revenues. I think before we ended up including a fund balance option during that time, I think we were predicting revenues to increase by less than 5%. That was the first and only time since the fund balance has been adopted that we used it for operations. And that required a 5-vote supermajority vote. There was a special whereas in your budget resolve to appropriate that money and why it was appropriated in this particular year for that purpose. So this will set us up for a mitigating result if we don't, if it doesn't come to fruition. My concern on the flip side is this is probably not how we want to set a trend in the future. That's the balancing act that we need to go with. If we are looking at getting through essentially this year and next year until the revaluation, because, it seems like the discussions the last several years have been nudging that $30 mark on a mill rate, and then after the reval goes through, that obviously, your valuation increases, your mill rate's gonna drop. That may not be as important, but we still have one budget left to get through before we introduce that mill rate and that revaluation in the mill rate.
Thank you, Administrator Hunter. So this year, according to your Q3 memo, Director Roy, we have received, it looks like 7.9 million of revenue sharing.
Correct. I unfortunately don't have my memo, but looking at it, in the budget book, we're $1.1 million over what we budgeted for fiscal year in February, correct.
Right.
However, the concern is what's coming ahead and not what we're currently seeing for the forecast of what they're forecasting for next year.
Understood. I was just trying to make the point that, should we need to, God forbid, tap into the reserve and not have as not have as much of it go to fund balance, we are, as we speak, $1 million over, and that amount will likely head to fund balance, correct?
Correct, if expenditures stay as they are currently. But if you have, like Heather mentioned, if you have a big, something come up that eats up a large amount of expenditures, that may eat up that difference that we received this year.
We are still to receive several more payments before the fiscal year end, correct?
But you're just focusing on one revenue item too. If we have other revenue items that don't meet budget, you have to take the entire package versus one line item. Just as a reminder, and I thought I had it with me, with your budget adjustments of FY '23, brings us up to a 65% confidence level in the current year. That's what we use for FY '23 that we're in now. 65%.
Thank you. Councilor Scott.
Thank you. Going back to the contingency that we used to have, was that changed prior to the 2008 economic fiasco, or was it after that because of that? Because of the downturn in the economy? Do you remember?
I'm thinking it happened before that.
It happened before that.
Before that. At that particular point in time, we did have a dip in the economy. That's when we had a significant debt burden, where our debt burden exceeded over 20% of the operating budget. I believe we were at 22% of the operating budget was in debt service.
Okay.
And we were looking at, that's a cut that unfortunately or fortunately doesn't have any direct ties to it. But
Okay.
you lose your emergency functionality.
Right. So you said that what we did last year was at the 65%, you said?
Yes.
Yes. So in our initial budget, when we presented to us on 4/6 with the initial budget of 3109, and it still had the school at $1.70 and us at 83, was that at the 65%?
The 3109 or the 3446?
The 3109. Had we,
The 3109 had us bumping up, I think it was 77%.
77?
I believe you're right, and that
77%?
recognized an additional $2 million
Right.
in revenue sharing,
Okay.
from whatever it was before to 77%.
Okay.
77%, yes. Because we started out with a 60% confidence level. When we did the budget book as published was at 60%.
At 60%, okay. Right.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. So you mentioned that we were at 65% currently with the current fiscal year?
The budget was approved with a 65% confidence level.
Okay. So that would actually put us, it would mean that the state's projection was spot on because we budgeted 6.8 million. We've received 7.9 million. And if you extrapolate out to the end of the year, realizing that not every month is exactly the same, that gets us to 11.3 million, which is 65% more than what we budgeted for. So I recognize that you need to take all the revenues together, but that just seems like, you know, a $4.5 million difference. I get being conservative, but that just seems like a little bit overkill to me. And then going back to our options here, with 2A, I don't think that our community could support reducing the library's operations by 20%, given all the feedback we received. I received several times more communications about the library budget than I did about the homeless shelter moratorium, which was the next biggest item that people spoke out against. So I just can't see that our constituents and our voters would stand for a 20% reduction in the library's operation. That just, you know, we didn't get a single comment supporting any cuts for the library. I just can't support that at all. Thanks.
Councilor LaChapelle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know we're getting off subject a little bit, but our bond payments, we went over our bond limit, well, over our threshold last year. When we bonded, was it 110% or something like that? When do these payments when do they have to be made? And where is it? I'm sure it's in this book someplace.
So let me kind of back up a little bit. The bond limit is based upon what you're planning on borrowing based upon that LCIP. And it's a snapshot in time. We may have some projects that go over. We may have some projects that, for whatever reason, get rescinded. It truly kind of bobs and weaves. We don't actually typically sell till at least 12 months-ish after you do the approval. What that allows us to do is a couple things. First of all, it allows us to look at the market and see when the best time to go out to bond is to get the most favorable rate. We know there are certain times of the year that we do not want to issue debt because the main bond bank may be issuing at that point in time. Massachusetts has a very tight schedule typically where they issue debt, so we don't want to compete with that at that point in time. If we avoid competing bond sales, because we go out on the open market on our own, very rarely do we fund through the bond bank's bond sale, overall bond sale. So by doing that, it allows us to pick a time in the market where it is more favorable that potentially gives us a better interest rate when there's not a whole bunch of competing sales. The other piece that it allows us to do is see what our spending pattern is. The IRS, because municipal debt is considered tax exempt from the bondholders, there are what's known arbitrage regulations that go with that essentially allow you to have a 24-month spend down. So there are certain snapshots every 6 months that the IRS says, okay, by this first 6 months, you need to have this amount of percentage spent. By 1 year into it, you need to have this. 18 months into it, you need to be almost there. And by 24 months, you need to be fully expended. By doing that year delay, it actually gives us essentially 3 years to spend down the money. because we have no problem now meeting some of those snapshots. Looking at answering your question, it also gives us essentially almost a 2-year time period before we bring on that principal payment. So think about your mortgage and if you did a home equity. So if your home equity doesn't fall in line until 2 years from now, how much of your monthly mortgage are you paying down in that 2-year period before you're issuing new debt? So that's one of our strategies. When I sit there and talk about that debt graph and measure it against the 2002 numbers and show that significant decline, that was part of our strategy during that time period that allows that payment, principal payment, to be paid off that much quicker. So we had the perfect storm. And in this case, it's actually a positive storm, where we had historically low interest rates, which enabled projects that we used to issue 15 to 20 years. We now reduce that to 7 to 10 years. By striating the principal payments out, it allowed us essentially to pay off a whole year's without incurring new debt, if we staggered or laddered that debt payment correctly. So usually in the first year, we are only paying interest. Because we sell them late enough, it's not going to hit till 2 years out.
So we're being affected in '23 by the LCIP of
21, yes.
21. Okay. Have we, where are we, so what we did in '22 was really going to have an effect on the 24 or 2024 when we start looking at the budget in '24.
Right.
Which is even more imperative to save more money because, well, let me ask you a question. What has our payments, because you've done a fine job as treasurer and all the other 5 hats that you wore in the city, where are our payments right now? If I'm looking at a budget, are we paying $1 million a month or a year? What are we doing, and where has it traditionally gone?
Traditionally, we are hovering around the same amount. If you look on, if you have your budget book,
Yes.
on page 13, we have always stripped out debt service on our tax rate sheet and put it as a separate category. So you will see in this FY24's budget, we are looking at paying $7,648,611 in debt service. That has been hovering around that same amount for several years now. Now, you will notice that is sneakily close to what our 80% debt limit is, correct?
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence that it's that close, because we are basing our debt limit on a 3-year average of your payoffs. So we have now hit a stagnant point by leaving that debt service at that amount and not changing the 80%. Those now are mirroring each other. What's going to happen with this level is, because of the cost of capital is rising, we are going to have to do one of 2 things. Either this budget is going to increase, or we are going to have to extend the lives of those projects again. So where we were sneaking them closer to 7 to 10, we're going to have to go back to 10 to 15, and even 20, just to keep the budget manageable.
So we saw last year, we went from 80 to 110%. So we're borrowing more money than we had in previous years. Would only make sense that this dollar amount at $7 million would increase unless you make the changes, correct? Unless you do.
I'd have to look at what's being paid off. Because the issue that we're having now, ignoring the COVID impact on construction cost and the interest rate environment, what we used to bond for, we are now funding through fund balance. And those were all the small little, for lack of better terms, rinky-dink projects. You know, our IT, our, I mean, there was one time that we actually bonded for our police cruisers.
No, that's a smart way, that's smart budgeting.
So I guess conversely with that, now that we're moving that over into fund balance, the only thing that's left are our big ticket items, those significant building improvements. And those are costing us a lot.
So what I'm looking at, and I know we're talking about this, not the LCIP, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to make that 80% on the LCIP coming up. So it looks like we're going to go over that amount again this year. Last year we were 110. Where is it going to be? And I'm just concerned on our payments going forward. That will directly affect our operating budget because our payments are going higher. So yes, the revenue's going up, or it's going to be up, but our expenses are going up also.
Yep.
And I'm just concerned on, it's a concern on both parts. We have some more money coming in, but we're spending a lot more. That doesn't make sense. So thank you for clarifying that for me, and then pretty much what I thought. I guess I would echo the concerns or the feelings of Councilman McCarthy and option 2A. Now, is that at 85% or 80%?
That's at 85%.
85%. That is the same as 2?
Yes.
2 is at 85% and 2A is at 85%?
That's correct.
Yes. And just for clarifications, in all three, whether it's 85 or 90, you're still requesting to have the reserve allocated from fund balance?
If I could get 5 votes.
Right, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just went through the book and added up all of the salaries at the library. Councilor Scott said that we were doing a 20% cut. If you add in all of the temporary wages and the salary wages of every employee at the library and take out the temporary wages and the one position that they're looking at in 2A, it comes out to an 8.6% cut. It's not a 20% cut. Now, I guess you could look at it differently and just go by a certain category, but if you're looking at the overall budget, it's an 8.6% cut, not a 20% cut. One other question. Historically, you talked about some projects not being funded at the same level as they get budgeted for in the LCIP, so you have to borrow less. Historically, what are you averaging?
We went through and we've pretty much caught up. So, not to get into really geeky debt service things, but it helps to kind of explain it. When you're in a low interest rate environment, the forecasters and the people that buy our bonds anticipate interest increasing over the life of that debt. So they pay us bond premium in advance. So what that does, when you're looking at, and we have it on all of our funds when we issue debt. So we were reaping a significant amount of cash premium when we sold that debt. We are not experiencing that right now because of the interest rate environment. That gave us a cash influx right out of the gate to fund additional projects the following year, so we didn't have to bond that. So between project surplus and that premium, it allowed us to fund, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 projects to the tune of $750,000 to $1 million, maybe even, $1.5 million. But we don't have that luxury this year. We've used out our bond premium. Unfortunately, if our projects are coming in on budget, they are just coming in on budget given the construction cost. If now what we're having to do is negotiate and eliminating things just to get it down within the budget.
Okay, because I'm trying to get a feel for if we go, like the 110% that or whatever it was last year, I thought it was higher than that, but whatever the number was last year, what is the actual we're gonna borrow?
At this rate, it's looking like we're going to be borrowing the
Much,
whole
the whole
thing.
So, okay, because I'm just trying to get a feel for the last, 5 or 6 years, where we are in relationship to that 80% overall over the 5-year period, where you said some of the time you didn't have to bond some of the projects that were actually put in there. So I'm just trying to get a feel for how far off we are from that, or even from 100% level, would reduce over, with the inflation, it would
No,
reduce the pressure.
I know what direction you're headed. I'm not sure, I mean, we would probably pick up, if we use the 100% snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
There's not been a year where we've been significantly below the 80% to absorb any
Right.
kind of carry forward with that.
Okay.
But it's something that I'll take a look at for sure.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at overall, it doesn't matter what the number is in the budget, it's what the actual bonding it ends up being. And I'm trying in my head to justify the going at or over the 100% if that's just a figure which hasn't been hit those targets haven't been hit in the past, so you're ahead of the game in the past, so the last couple of years where we've had to go over makes up for it. So I'm just trying to get a feel for that. So I don't know if you could go back 5-6 years and see on average what that percentage is. Has it been, what's it average over 5 years?
Yeah,
is
I
what
have
I'm
a
getting.
trend, just so, where we started at, what you guys cut it to, how
Yeah.
it's snapped against the 80%.
Yeah.
And if it was over that 80%, was there a project that was triggering that, like the middle school edition or the high school edition, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I can say prior overages related to school projects until the last couple of years. When we started doing substations and armory repairs and just the general cost of everything, that has really put a damper on things.
What is you can get back to me on this, I don't expect you to know this off the top of your head, but what is our bonded amount now compared to the city budget? How has that trended over the since this 80% level was put in?
It's funny, you would think it would naturally go down.
Yeah,
We, again, deliberately made a decision to keep it hovering right around that 20% mark, to really get rid of that outstanding debt and really get that debt limit down. I would say recently, we've been hovering about 18% or so, but we have been diligent about hovering right around the 20%. A, because we're used to it from a budgetary standpoint. B, because the interest rates were so low, it allowed us to really get aggressive with our payoffs and do more for that.
yeah, unfortunately, we don't have that option
Exactly.
moving forward.
I'm losing all of it.
Any idea of what interest rate you'll be looking at?
It's 3% currently. Currently, it's 3%.
3?
We
Yes.
get what's known as reofferings.
Yeah.
So people that have sold on the open market, they'll kind of tell us what we are. So we look at those people whose rating are similar to us and see. So we're hovering about 3%. My guess is it'll probably stay that. I think the worst case scenario would be 3.5, 3.75. But
So it's significantly less than what the open market interest rates are now for the average
we had one
consumer.
bond sale that I sold for 1.8%.
Wow.
I mean, that's what yes.
I'd like to get in on that.
Yeah,
So
refinance my mortgage.
We were, and it's almost like you want to package more money during that time period, but we got to be able to meet that spend down.
Yeah,
That's the flip side of it.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody was doing. They were selling bonds, accumulating the interest earnings, hoarding the money, and then they get the projects done when they got them done.
okay, thank you.
Councilor Herman?
Thank you. Regarding the library, the 20% cut I mentioned was in the library's operating hours, not in salaries. The average resident doesn't really know what salaries people make, but they do notice when the library is open and when it's closed. And I think given all the feedback we received, I don't think that voters are going to stand for reducing the library's capacity by 20%. I just can't see that.
I have some questions about the 2A cut here. Director Weber, do you mind coming to the podium? I guess, can you explain what the Library Tech 2 position does or did? I understand it's currently vacant.
Sure. So yeah, the position is currently vacant. The library technician 2 is our nominal teen librarian. So the title of the position is library technician 2. But essentially, this person generally deals with the teen population. So they do things like ordering the teen books. They make sure the collection's in good condition. They're going through and making connections within the community. They do a lot of outreach at the high school. They do a lot of partnerships with the high school, getting kids in the community signed up for library cards. Last year, they averaged 63 programs throughout the entire year, so that's about one program a week that's bringing kids into the library, giving them an activity to do, whether it's a passive or an active activity, and so the position does a lot with that. They interact very heavily with programming and communications, which is promotion within the library as well. So this position has been responsible for a lot of our social media posting, things like that, making sure the library's name is out in the community. Managing our programs team is a part of this as well. So they manage the teen programs, and they also help shepherd new people who are coming onto the position. They don't supervise, but they oversee the teen lounge that was created too, so they make sure that the equipment is being used properly, that the video game systems and the other technology that the teens have access to is in good working order. So they're ordering additional supplies for that as well. So that's the bulk of what they're doing within the library.
And so if we did not have this position, I guess what services might be impacted for our teen population that uses the library?
Sure. So we'd have to redistribute some of the work, but definitely a lot of the outreach that we're able to do would suffer. We wouldn't be able to necessarily go out to a lot of our community partners, help the kids sign up for library cards. We wouldn't be able to have as many programs. Of course, with the library open fewer hours, that would also be impacted with the total number of programs anyways, but it would further reduce that. Plus, we'd have to have this work taken on by other employees that are already in the building and already doing their fair share of the load for their programs, their collection development. So they would sort of have to take on additional work on top of that.
Thank you, Director Weber. Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm all set with you, Director Weber. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I am going to be speaking about the library. This is not fun, folks. We look at the police department, we say, no, we're going to freeze a couple spots. We look at the fire department and say, possibly delay another spot. You thought we killed somebody's baby when we did that. That was the uproar on that. When we're starting to cut every place, we spend almost $2 million a year in the city of Lewiston, that includes the school department, on libraries. I'm not taking away the importance of the library. I'm not taking away the importance of reading books. I'm not doing that at all. $2 million a year just on salaries, not on books, not on structures, just on salaries. At some point, everybody has to take a little bit of a hit. This is not being outrageous to them. So I have also received a ton of emails and letters. I have had some in support. I've had many not supportive. But my big question to all of them is, where do you want to cut? I've answered a bunch of them. Where do you want to cut? What are you suggesting? We have to cut someplace. Where do we cut? Do we cut the police department in half? Do we cut City Hall in half? Do we close City Hall on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Where do you want to cut? And it's amazing I went back and forth with only a few of them, that they didn't have any suggestions. I think the library is a wonderful place. It's a good institution. We have a lot of libraries in the city of Lewiston. So we have 6 libraries in the school department, and you get the Lewiston Public Library. School department's not touching the libraries at all. They're not affecting it at all. This is not too big of an ask. Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If we did option 2A and changed the fund balance from 85 to 77, what would that put the mill rate? Could you do some quick justice there?
The reservation, or for the
Confidence.
revenue sharing?
Right, for the revenue
Okay,
sharing.
yeah.
If we bump that from 85 to 77, what would that put the rate at?
It would add 44 cents to the tax rate.
So it would be 30.44. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. I'm just going to refer to this. Just going back to the library, I realize that we have several school libraries, but for the 30,000 or so of us who are not in school, we only have one library, which is the public library. And it currently takes up approximately 2% of the city's budget. And for less than $63,000 in savings, we would be reducing its opening hours by 20%. I just don't think that's feasible for such a small amount of savings to affect so many people at such a high rate. I just can't support that, and I don't think that the voters of Lewiston will support it either.
And Minister Hunter, for the public's benefit, when we're talking about a penny on the tax rate, it's equal to roughly $22,000?
$22,145.
Thank you. And so we're talking about, sorry, Councilor. We're talking about saving $62,807. This is actually less than 3 cents on the tax rate. Thank you. Councilor Scott.
Thank you. I do have a question for Director Rebo, if she doesn't mind. So I understand that the position is not filled, but if we eliminate the position, we're not going to look to hire for that position. And if we reduce the library hours to 40 hours a week, eliminating that additional from 45, how do you think that's going to affect staff, and while staff's going to be able to work and do the work that needs to be done in the library?
Yeah, so I think that it could have an adverse effect on staff, and I think we could end up losing additional staff who might be strained by the new schedule for the hours. If we're under 40 hours, or if we're at 40 hours, we'd have to come up with a new open hours schedule, and we have a few ideas that we're sort of discussing, but it could end up that schedule ends up not working for staff, so staff end up leaving. With the work being redistributed, we are not going to be able to again, go out into the community because we're not going to have as many opportunities. We're not going to have as many staff members to be able to go out and do that work that was really concentrated heavily on this person. So then you're going to be putting more work on people that are already experiencing very heavy workloads and dealing with the public and everything like that.
So I too have the same concern about the library and thinking about the $62,807. I understand that we need to make cuts, but I would have to agree with Councilor Harriman that when we talk about the schools versus the public library, there's a significant difference. Nobody can just go into the library at the schools and use those libraries. That's for the students alone. I can't go in, even though I am a parent of former students or I have a grandson that is a student at Farwell School. Can I go into Farwell School Library and use that library? I think we also have to recognize that the library is not just about books and renting out books. It is about people that don't necessarily have internet in their home, and they go to the library to use the internet to fill out job applications and get work done. They are about people that don't have a place to study, so they go there to finish their degree and work that out. I know that when I was going to the University of Maine, right here in Lewiston, it was easier for me because I was closer to the library. That's where I would go as an adult because well, let's be honest, couldn't study with 4 kids in my house and do the work that I needed to do. So I would go to the library at night and I would get my work done and I would write my reports and everything else that I had to do. So I am truly concerned about cutting that. I too have heard from many people. We got another email today. It's been pretty much on a regular basis hearing from the community their concerns about cutting the library. And I did get one email that was in support of cutting the library, and every other one was against cutting the library. And I just can't support that either. I understand when we're talking about the additional revenue, when we talk about the 90% versus the 85%, even to what we had before, this is for a one-time thing. This is not something we're going to move forward with every year. This is something that we're going to do. It's going to be put in reserve specifically for the necessity of covering anything that we may not get. Is that correct?
That's correct for this year, yes.
Okay. So, and we talk about our budget. We talk about in a couple of years, we're going to have our reevaluation done, where we're going to see a decrease or what the actual mill rate should be in our community. We talk about other things that are going to be happening. We talk about, there's been conversations about keeping it around that $30 mark. I am still in favor of option 1. It brings it down, $29.90. We've got the one more year. I know it's risky, and I understand inflation. I understand all of those things. I mentioned this morning in our meeting. I had to tell my kids, get the dryer rack out. We ain't using the dryer anymore because our electric bill's too high, and my kids didn't even know what a dryer rack was. So I understand all of those things. I do. But we also have to understand what our community needs. The library is not just about books. It is a community resource that is very effective in helping our community all the way around. And for 3 cents, I can't see not keeping that in there somehow. And that's where I'm at.
Councillor Jelinek.
Thank you. So I spent the weekend thinking a little bit about this, and a couple of things I was reflecting on was that, number one, I don't think the administrator or the director of finance would be throwing up 3 options to us that were ridiculous. So, we had to look at all 3 of these, and they're hard. It's hard. And then I found myself really reflecting on the past 5 years, looking at that tax rate and going back to fiscal year 19. And you had brought us down that memory lane when we started this process, and we were at 2867. And each year, reflectively, 2891, 2867, 2826, 2850. And here we are, fiscal year 24, and what is it going to be, right? And if you look at option 1, we're looking at a $29.90, that's $1.40 more. And if you go to option 2, then you're up to $1.66. I have had great faith in the presentations that have come forth by the department heads, the rationale for what they need, why they need it. I've also had a good sense that department heads have done their due diligence in trying to shave the budget as best they can. I mean, it's expensive to run a business. Let's just name that. And I understand, we have to be good stewards for our citizens, but I also feel like we have to be good listeners. And like Councillor Scott, and I think Councillor Herron mentioned, I've received 1 email in opposition or in support of cutting the library. Everything else is coming loud and clear. And I take my role here, not just listening to department heads and listening to what you as leaders have brought forth, but also what is it that our community is saying. So I will say that I'm leaning toward option 1. I could be convinced to do option 2. But again, I look at, that tax rate, and I think about $29.90 versus 3016. And I haven't really decided, but that's where I'm weighing, and those are reasons I'm weighing those ways. So I hope that helps explain where I'm at.
Councillor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Clement, do you mind using your?
Keep it from falling off here. I've sat back and, like that great philosopher Yogi Berra said, you can hear a lot by listening. I've heard the arguments for and against cuts. I know this is not a good year, but I think also of the senior citizens out there who have lived in their house many, many years, and they're on the edge right now. I think we have to be cognizant of them. I've heard what the school department had to say. I've heard what our professional staff has had to say. I, in good conscience, cannot vote for anything other than option 2A. I think we owe that to the citizens. We don't know what's coming. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't think anybody here on the dais does. We can't get out of this by selling baked goods or T-shirts. And I just think we have to be good stewards, and we have to make some painful cuts. If that doesn't cut it, then I don't know what does. But I just cannot, in good conscience, raise some of the dollar amounts that we're seeing going by here. 2A is where I stand. And hopefully we'll get enough votes to pass 2A. And do you need a 5-vote majority on that as well?
I need a 5-vote majority if I want to reserve fund balance.
Okay, then hopefully we'll get the 5 votes so you can reserve the fund balance. I don't have a lot of faith in where our economy is headed. I mean, I listen to the news today, every day. Economists are all over the place. I don't think that they share the same rosy picture as some people on this dais do. I think we're headed for some very bad times. I'm not a great prognosticator. I'm not an economist. A lot of these people that are telling us things are good, they're not economists either. And some that are right out in left field, as far as I'm concerned. So I think we need to be prudent. I'm not a gambler. I'm not going to gamble with the people's money, and I'm not going to gamble with people's lives. I leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McCarthy?
Thank you. Director, there was already a plan in the works to cut library hours by 5 hours, correct, and close on Monday?
So there was a proposal before city administration and the council that was supported by staff to reduce the hours to 45. One of the options was to close on Monday with staff only in the building. The other proposal was for redistributing the hours, and it wasn't a cut so much as a restructure so that staff would have the ability to rework their own work to be better at the work that they do in the community.
So with a 40-hour work week, how is that going to affect the other 5 days?
Because
If you close on Monday, how will it affect the current schedule of the other 5 days?
Sure. So there's a couple of different options that we're looking at. One of them is redistributing those hours over 6 days rather than closing for a full day if we're going down to 40 hours, because a lot of we're open 6 days a week right now and Saturdays, right? So then if you're cutting Monday and then you're doing a Tuesday through Saturday schedule, I don't see that every staff member would be able to accommodate that in their lives. Right now, we have a rotation that staff do, so it's usually every third Saturday that gets distributed through all of our full-time staff. So with the 40 hours, we would probably look at just restructuring the hours throughout the week, 6 days a week instead.
Okay, thank you. I have one other thing. One of the things I want to mention is, there's a lot of talk about the reevaluation and the mill rate going down to about $22 a thousand or whatever. If you've lived in the city of Lewiston for 20 or 25 or 30 years and your house hasn't been reassessed, you're probably going to look at a 50% increase in your property taxes after the reevaluation, because the mill rate's going to go down from 30, 31, whatever it is at the time, to around 22, but the assessment on your house is probably going to at least double. So a lot of people that have been in their house for a long time are going to face a large increase in 2 years. So that's why it's prudent for us to look at keeping the mill rate as low as we can going into that, so to keep the hit on, and it's going to affect, if you've been in your house 30 years, how old are you? You're the ones that, you're going to be the senior citizens. You're going to be the ones almost at retirement. So the other thing that we've got to take into consideration is the $5 million in fund balance that the school department has used to reduce the tax rate. That's brought their balance down to $5 million. Last year, they had 41 or more unfilled positions, and that's where they got the fund balance moving forward to put into the budget this year. So without that $5 million, you're looking at over a $2 increase in the mill rate just to fund the school next year if there's no fund balance to fund that. So these are all aspects. I don't look at when I look at a budget, I don't look at it for a single year. I'm looking at what's on the horizon, how people are going to be affected in the future. Because if you're not cautious and you're not conservative spending now, then you've got to do draconian cuts or everyone's going to get slammed in the future. So that's why people call me a cheapwad or whatever, cheapskate or whatever they want to call it, tightwad. But I'm really concerned about the next few years, and everything is, the perfect storm is coming, and if we're not prepared for it, then there's going to be a lot more misery out there. We're going to be looking at layoffs. We're going to be looking, in the fire department, parking our vehicle to have layoffs. It could get to that point if we are not stewards of the city's money at this point in time. So that's why I am all for 2A. It's actually a little more than I wanted to spend, but 2A is where I'm at. Thank you.
Councilor Herman?
Thank you. Administrator Hunter, it's my understanding that when a revaluation occurs, it's typically revenue flat. So if we're collecting, say, $100 in property taxes now, but it's distributed over people in a certain way, the distribution changes, but we're still collecting the same $100 or whatever. But if residential property taxes all go up by 50%, then does all the commercial, how does that get redistributed?
So I don't believe my chief assessor is behind me, so I will try to do it in my layman's terms. What typically happens is there's a shift in category. So in Lewiston, the residential homeowners typically have not had a revaluation adjustment in a number of years. So your commercial and your industrial may be at value, if not elevated. So when you go through that whole process in all of the categories, there's a shift between categories. So you're correct in theory, the whole revenue may stay the same. But if I'm commercial and you're residential, I may end up actually having my tax bill go down while yours goes up. The piece that allows you, at least allows the residential homeowner for some relief. Right now, they're getting a proration of the homestead exemption because we are not at full value. They don't get to capture the full value of the homestead exemption. That will at least provide some relief to them as we go through that revaluation process.
And one other thing is, anyone who's 65 or older, I believe it is, who's lived in their house for at least 10 years, their taxes are currently frozen at the current dollar amount, correct?
If they applied and
Okay.
if they met the criteria.
Yeah.
I know the state is looking at adjusting that in some fashion. We don't know what that end result will be.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Clement?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Harriman's point, the adjustment on that, what I'm hearing through Maine Municipal is that they're going to do away with that locking of taxes. There's a strong sentiment amongst the folks that make up MMA to do away with that. That seems to be what has gone through on their platform bills. This whole deal on revaluation, I think, a very simple way of looking at it, the city needs X dollars to operate. How we get those X dollars is the formula that's applied. Currently, industrial taxes are probably over where they should be. many cases residential, as Councillor McCarthy said, the people that have been in their homes for 30 years may not have had an inspection or anything in a number of years. I live in a relatively new home. Mine was checked initially after it was built and has since been visited once to see where things ended up, whereas somebody might not have seen an assessor for 20, 25 years. Those people are going to be in for a shock, I'm afraid, because I do think, according to what Chief Assessor Healy told us here in one meeting not terribly long ago, look at your revaluation as thirds. A third of your people are going to see their taxes go up, a third are going to see them stay about the same, and a third are going to see them decrease. The folks that are going to see the increase are the ones that have the older homes that have been there the longest and are probably the least apt to be able to afford a massive increase. It's just, the dollar amount is the same, it's just how we're going to collect that from whom. Thank you.
Councillor Pease, did you have something? And, yeah, let's use our mic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we've been talking a lot about the reval, what it's going to do to our tax rate. I agree with Councilor Clement and Mr. McCarthy. There's a lot of people are going to get hurt by this reval, and the older people are the ones that are going to be hurt. My thing is we're asking different departments to cut. And if I ask the city administrator right now, and she may be able to answer it or not, how much did we ask the fire department to cut? How much did we ask the police department to cut? How much did we ask the school department to cut versus what we're asking the library to cut?
I'm not sure you can equate the two because of the budgets they had to start with and the wherewithal to cut. I would say based upon it is somewhat equitable going across. The other departments have probably more options to fund balance that allows their budgets to be reduced because those items qualify for fund balance. The library typically uses the endowment to fund those items. That's probably the biggest distinction between the library and the other departments.
The real reason I asked that question is I just want everybody to realize we're just asking everybody to tighten the strings. And we're not looking to cause any harm or layoffs or anything like that. We're talking about people that have called us, sent us emails about saving the library, saving the library. Letters to the editor, save the library, save the library. Total them all up. How many have you got? Even if you said you had 1,000, that's only 1/30% of the city of Lewiston's taxes, of the people that live in the city. So we're only hearing from a very small amount. I understand the library is important, but I'm just looking at where we're going to save. Thank you.
Councillor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And going to Councilman Harriman's suggestion, 65 or older locks their taxes in. That doesn't lock your taxes if you're renting an apartment. The rates go up consistently. It's inconceivable to me that we see in the business world that everybody's cutting hours. Name a restaurant in town that hasn't shut their doors for certain amounts of time. Fishbones, we can name them all around here right now, and because of staffing shortages, because of multiple reasons, and they're just cutting hours. We have to do the same in government. We cannot still maintain the same while the rest of the world is cutting in the business world. One of the suggestions that I would offer, Mr. Mayor, to you at this point, just so we can get we've been doing this for an hour and a half, and I get a feeling we could do this for another 5 hours. I'll take turns. It's just to see where we're at, and maybe say who likes option number one, you know, the thumbs up, thumbs down, just to get a feel of the council. I think we have a rough idea right now, but, and then maybe working towards, you know, process of elimination, and see if we can come to some kind of a compromise, because I don't think we're going to accomplish anything just doing the same, coming to the mic back and forth. That'd be my thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, I was about to chime in here, but Councilor Pease, did you have something else to add?
Just one comment I'd like to make, thank you, Mr. Mayor, is this homestead exemption. Mine went down $750 this year. Even though they're supposedly going to freeze my taxes, it still went down, my tax bill still went up.
That's because the valuation ratio went down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want anybody to be misinformed that just because the homestead is going to get better, revalue is going to do better, you're still going to see a fluctuation in your taxes. There's no ands, ifs, or buts. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, we'll discuss ways forward here first. I guess I would like to offer some perspective here. You know, so we have this list of things in 2A, and you know, it would be hard to argue that the library is treated equitably versus all the other departments. It would be one thing if we told all the departments, you know, cut by 5% and you know, come back. But in fact, you know, many of the positions are either frozen when there's multiple of those positions already employed by the city, or in the case of the police department, we are, how many positions are we freezing in the police department? Is it one or two?
Two.
Two. And how many positions does that leave open for the police department?
I believe, Chief, are you back there? Sure. I think you
'Cause
have
we had a
one in
little
the
bit of
works, one in the works and one open still?
So we have 2 in the works currently. That would leave 1 that we could fill at this point to get it to 83, and then 85 is full complement, so we have 2 frozen. 1 available right now if we do complete the hiring of the 2 that are well within the process right now.
Okay, so we have 2 that are very likely to be hired, is what you're telling us?
Yes.
And then even if we freeze these 2, if we found somebody else, we would still be able to hire them because we still have an open position.
We could still hire 1 more, correct?
Correct. And, thank you, Chief. And, you know, for instance, like fire inspector, we're delaying the hiring until the start of the fourth quarter here. Yeah, the library is not treated equitably here. Here we're talking about eliminating a position, and we are talking about eliminating the only one of that at the library, the teen library position. So it is, I think, disingenuous to say that, like, we're asking all of them, asking all the departments to make cuts. I agree that the department heads have done a fine job with, I think you call it department offers, correct? Where they have, you know, come forward with voluntary cuts. But what's proposed here in 2A is, you know, really is an unfair burden on the library. Any further comments before we start to, you know, assess where we're at? Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Excuse me. So, I hope the community's seeing, this is I would agree, a very tough conversation. Excuse me. It's not easy to do. And so, no matter what we do, we have to have 5. Even if we did a poll right now, I don't think we have 5 for going one way or the other. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and I'm thinking about a compromise here, and I just want you to hear me out. The library, when they came to us, and when you came to us about the using Monday or possibly for a day to get the work done, and the trustees were in support of that, and looking at that possible change and moving around and what can be done. But this would actually eliminate the chance to do that because it would take down that day. If, and just hear me out, if we kept that one piece in there, went with option 2A, agreeing with the 85% instead of the 90%, how much would that be? What would make that the difference? Because 22,000 for every penny, that's actually 66,000, so that's a little less than 3 cents, correct?
Yes.
So that would make it $30 and two point something?
Well, yeah, it's always a swag with the penny, so, yeah, $30, $30.03 potentially.
Just to clarify, Counselor Scott, you're talking about keeping option 2A, but removing.
That one piece for $62,807.
Right, I see.
And I will be the fifth vote to agree with the 2A. Sorry, I just made that compromise. Put that out there. And that still keeps our library, gives them the opportunity to work on that proposal that the trustees agreed with, doesn't eliminate any hours at this point, and we can see where they can go to move forward with that and give them the time to do that work. That's just my thought. I'm trying to find a compromise here, knowing that we have some significant differences in some of these opinions about this, but also at the same time, all of us understanding the work that's being done. And I just want to voice my opinion that I really appreciate this kind of conversation. It is a difficult conversation, and we may not all agree, but I have always been one to try to find a way to compromise and come to an agreement. And so that's where I'm sitting right now.
Thank you, Counselor Scott.
Mr. Mayor, if I could?
Oh, yes, and then I have a
So
question. for Mr.
essentially,
Hunter.
and we may have the same question. So essentially, you're saying 2A, eliminating that one adjustment
Just that one.
and essentially bringing the tax rate up to 30.03.
Yeah, or 30.27, or whatever it's going to be with the
Right,
total, the
okay.
actual number.
Thank you, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. I guess my question is, what is the dollar amount between the 85 to 90%?
It goes from 1.5 to 976, right? Isn't that what you have
Yeah.
on paper?
So,
That's
That's what that is,
600,000. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so, yes. We have our Ward 2 math whiz here.
yeah, essentially $595,000 difference.
Okay. And, yeah, I guess, would there be a number, I guess if the council was not fine with 90%, could we inch that up a little higher, perhaps recognize 87.5%, split the difference? Both of these amounts will be covered by the reserve that we will have from fund balance, correct?
If I get 5 votes.
Yes, no, understood. And so we're awfully close here. I mean, we're talking about a spread of less than 600,000. While we're figuring that, Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you. So, Director Hunter, if you get 5 votes, 4 votes would still pass the budget at whatever one we wanted,
Correct.
correct?
I
But
just
to
would not
lock
get
up-
the reservation.
To lock up the revenue service. So 4 votes would lock up whatever budget the council decided, just needs a simple majority at that point,
Correct.
correct? Thank you.
Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. Sorry, were you calculating something that you'd like to share?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, I guess Councilor Scott, did you have something else before I?
Yes, so just to go off of what Councilor LaChapelle just said, if that's the case and we don't use any of that additional revenue in any of these proposals that the city administrator made to us, we're back to our original 3109. Well, actually, it's less because it's this, is that where we're at, or?
I believe what he was saying is regardless of which option you pick, if there's only 4 votes, that would approve the budget. I just cannot reserve fund balance.
Okay.
Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you. Would reserving the fund balance, would that be a separate vote? Could it be a separate vote?
First of all, using fund balance is a separate vote to start with.
Okay.
Using the fund balance for a budget cushion would require the supermajority vote.
on the initial budget vote.
Correct. Because they go hand in hand.
Just to, sorry, go ahead. Anything further, Counselor?
Not right now, thanks.
Okay. So just to, building on what everyone has said here, if I'm understanding correctly, we could approve one of these options with a simple majority, which would be 4 votes. And at that point, we'd be using these higher revenue sharing numbers, 85 or 90%, depending. And then you're saying we would just then operate without the reserve from fund balance?
That's correct.
Okay. I guess we'll just, kind of do things with a thumbs up or a nod here. We'll just go down to the list. Do we have, how do councilors feel about option number 1? 3. And then, was it 2?
Mm-hmm.
2. Are we voting twice? We're not voting, but.
Oh, well, it's not really a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it's kind of like I accept 2.
Okay, all right. And then, how are we feeling about 2A? I guess there we are for a right to second.
Yep.
Do we,
Although,
sorry, Councilor McCarthy,
Chime in.
did you have something?
yes. Is it necessary, on that library adjustment, is it because of a staffing level that they would have to go to 40 hours? If we
That
eliminate
was
the
a parking lot
position.
item.
Okay, but what would the savings be if you just left it at the 45 that the library trustees were considering and eliminate the position? What would the savings be?
We weren't going to eliminate the position. It would be the $12,222 that you found in option 2.
Okay, so you can't stay at 45 hours and eliminate that position, is what you're saying?
It would be extremely challenging from a staffing standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Clement, did you have
Thank you,
something?
Mr. Mayor. Question for Councilor Scott. If I understood what she had to say correctly, she would propose option 2A, eliminate the Library Tech 2 position. We'd fund that, but option 2A would be there. The library would be open 45 hours, staff only on Monday, and that, okay? I don't like it, but I could swing that.
And that would save, is that what would save 12,000, Administrator Hunter?
That would save $12,200. We'd be adding back 3 cents to 2A.
So,
3 cents.
It's like 2.
Which I would, between now and then, try to find a place for that 3 cents.
Okay. I agree with that.
Do you mind if I ask, just show of thumbs, who would agree to that?
I was just going to say, Councilor.
Oh, I'm reading your mind.
Yes. Councilor Jillians, did you have something first?
can I just get some clarity from my colleague here? Are you suggesting, Counselor, that what's outlined or suggested by city staff in option 2 go down to option 2A when it pertains to the library? Is that what you're suggesting? 45 hours, staff only to Monday, same capacity?
No, both of those are included.
My understanding of option 2 and 2A,
We just take-
2A would include everything in 2. We would add everything in 2A except the Library Tech 2 position.
Right.
We would fund that, and that would bring us up.
It would bring us back up to 45 hours, and it would save the full-time position.
Okay.
So just to clarify, we're talking about taking the library option from 2 and moving it to 2A.
No, we're just.
No, we're essentially doing 2A, but eliminating that reduction of 62, which
Oh,
if
I
you
see.
eliminate that reduction, you're back to 45 hours, closed on Monday to the public, squishing the other staff into the other open days and using the temporary wage savings of $12,220.
And how does the council feel about that? Councilor Jelinas, please continue.
So I feel like I just want to take the attention off the library for a minute. I think for me to get behind this, it's not just about the library. I mean, y'all know I'm a big supporter of the library, but it's also looking at public works, it's looking at fire, it's looking at, well, when I think about assessing it, that's just a delayed hire. Same with one of the positions for the fire, it's a delayed hire for the fire inspector. I'm seeing that, 10-111. Remove, okay, yeah, okay. But I guess I'd be curious about these freezes. Oh, 2 of the hires are delayed as well for public works, so it's really just 2 positions in public works. Could Director Brenchek speak to that, please, so I just have to get my head wrapped around that again? I know you've probably spoken about it before.
The mechanics position has been tough to hire, okay? So I think that's not going to hurt us. We still have open positions to fill. When it comes to the highway workers, they are so diverse in what they do, and especially in winter operations, every single one of those is going to hurt. And it's going to hurt in winter operations. And that's, as you know, we live in Maine. It's 8 months out of the year. Delayed hires are better than a freeze, but it doesn't guarantee that we're going to go find somebody in October when it's starting to snow for November. So you're looking for somebody all the way through, and being able to have the flexibility to hire them when we can get them is preferred. And one frozen position is going to have an impact. I mean, that's going to take one plow route out of circulation, which will just increase delays and certainly not have enough manpower to consider the special group that we did for downtown that really, kind of helped our operations this year. Because the shortfall in the sewer department also hurts winter operations. So even though that's not budget related to our tax dollar, it does hurt winter.
Anything further, Councilor Jelinas? No. Councilor Scott, apologize, Councilor Harriman?
Director Brenchik, I just wanted to ask real quick. So these 3 highway workers, the one that would potentially be frozen and the 2 that would potentially be hired, a delay hire, those are the people who drive the plow trucks and the sidewalk plows?
Everybody does in public works in that
Okay.
PW position.
Okay. Thank you.
So if I'm understanding council, where we're at is 2A, but adding back in the library tech position. Am I understanding that correctly?
45 hours.
45 hours.
Or well, right, yes. Okay. And should we, if that were an option, would we be getting 5 votes for that, or how do people feel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have 5.
Okay. Let's, thank you, Councilor. 1 second. So, yeah, certainly not ideal, but yes, let's proceed with that, Councilor.
Okay, so one thing, I think we've got
Administrator Hunter, I mean.
We're still working on the LCIP, and we've got a little bit of time to kind of revisit that. Fund balance, there was one other change. Somebody had asked about the PW building roof membrane, which is item number 99, or row 99. That is going to be absorbed with the current funding. There is that extra funding available there. Also, I will say, the fire chief went back through on the LCIP for the Main Street Fire Station, based upon Councilor LaChapelle's recommendation to wiggle $500,000 from the starting point, so we're down another $300,000 on that. So
We're down another 300,000 beyond what we talked about the other day.
that's correct.
Okay.
So the only piece we haven't spent a whole lot of time on, just to kind of remind everybody about the schedule. So Tuesday, we're doing school, CDBG, home, general fund, TIF, drug enforcement, recreation activities, and school. We do not meet the following week because of the school referendum. the third Tuesday, which is a normal meeting date, we will be approving the utility budgets. We have not talked at great length about the utility budgets. As you recall, when I presented the first round of adjustments and so forth, none of the three utilities were coming in with a rate increase. They were kind of skinny at this point based upon the infrastructure needs and the regulatory requirements. As you might recall, sewers, the bulk of that increase was related to the treatment plant. Stormwaters were related to the infrastructure projects and increase of debt service. So I guess I just want to revisit that to see if anybody has any questions on the utilities, to kind of take a minute to see, or at least give you the opportunity that, yes, we do need to approve the utility budget. So if you have questions, you have about 2 weeks before we go to approve those budgets. So if something comes up between now and then, please reach out, because otherwise I'm not anticipating any further adjustments on any of those utility budgets.
Further questions or comments from the council? Councillor Scott or Councillor Harriman?
Thank you. I guess I would just ask whether we're going to meet on Thursday or if it's going to be Tuesday at this point.
At this point, Tuesday.
Okay.
Councillor LaChapelle.
Thank you. This is unrelated to the budget right here. I think it's imperative, well, I want to thank my fellow councilors for going through a difficult time and being able to communicate. I would encourage us to not lower it to a different level. Bad enough that some of us get maligned in the press and on Lewiston Rocks by some of the people on the council. I take great offense when somebody sits here and says I'm less than disingenuous. I'm disingenuous in my thoughts. I would encourage everybody to argue their stance, fight for their stance, but let's not lower it to that level. And it's below the office that you sit in, Mr. Mayor, to call me disingenuous. It's below the office you're in. I think it's below you. I think we need to keep it more of a professional level. And I support your right to argue on any issue you want. Just don't start calling me names. And if that's going to be the case, it's going to get pretty nasty. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate all of the councillors' input, all of the discussion that we've had here this evening, and not just this evening, over this entire budget cycle. And yeah, looking forward to the upcoming vote. Anything further, Administrator Hunter or Director Roy?
Mr. Mayor, I would chime in again about staff and the department heads on everything they've done to this budget. So kudos to them.
Thank you.
It's been an interesting ride.
We couldn't do this without them.
Yes,
Absolutely.
And thank all the ones that aren't here with us this evening, too, please.
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're done. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
I feel like I had an operation at a couple people, but we did it.